Welcome.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone.
We're just waiting for one person, and as soon as she joins, we will start. Good day to everyone. Greetings from Mexico. Good morning. I will give a couple of seconds for everyone to set. Okay, I think it's time to start, so I'm gonna first start introducing myself. I am Amelia Arreguin, coordinator of the UNCBD Women Caucus, and I will be your moderator today. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to this roundtable, the second one of our series, Gender is a Biodiversity Issue. The roundtable is particularly to discuss one main question about how to update NBSAPs and develop national reports from a gender-sensitive, gender-responsibly. And this event is being co-hosted by the CBD Women Caucus and the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And just before starting, I would like to bring your attention to a couple of technical elements. Please, we have interpretation. Notice that we have interpretation support into Spanish and French. Click on the globe button and select your preferred language if you need it. And also, if my colleagues interpreters, could you are able to chat, to send this message in the chat for the people that are listening to English, that they notice that there is the interpretation. I will give a couple of seconds for people to realize that there is interpretation, because also we would like to ask all of you, particularly the ones using the interpretation, if you could let us know by renaming your user and adding a code for the language that you are using or speaking, so we realize if the interpretation is being used or not, and we make the best of uses of the resources that we have. Second, also to address your questions, we encourage you to type them in the chat during the session, and if possible, to specify who among the panel you are directing them, and we will address as many as possible questions after all the interventions are made. So, being said that, let's begin the discussion. And I just want to give a brief introduction before. And well, recognizing that national biodiversity strategies and action plans are the principal instruments for implementing the CBD, and that national reports are the main instrument for monitoring and reviewing the work under the convention at COP15 under the decision 15.6. The parties adopted a mechanism, an enhanced multidimensional approach to planning, monitoring, reviewing, and reporting. Under this decision, parties to the CBD committed themselves, among other actions, to revise and update their NBSAPs aligned with the Kunming-Montreal GBF and its goals and targets, and to submit them through the clearinghouse mechanisms by COP16, saying that they just have 1.5 years to revise or update the NBSAPs. Also, they agreed that once to adopt these revised or updated NBSAPs as policy and or legal instruments, and also to mainstream them with broader national strategies and plans, such as their national development plans, their poverty reduction strategies, and other relevant national sectoral and cross-sectoral plans. And finally, a main decision that they agree on is to submit their 7th national report by February 2026 and the 8th report by 2029. And our speakers today, they will give us more details about how could this be done on a gender-responsive manner. And by identifying minimum elements that should be included in the revised NBSAPs, and also to identify entry points of how to integrate them in the 7th and the 8th national reports. For that, I want to invite our distinguished panel today. First, we're going to have Cicilia Githaiga, UNCBD Women Caucus Advisor. Then we will have Jilian Campell, Head of Monitoring, Review and Reporting at the UNCBD. We also have with us Marion Marigo, Capacity Building and Biodiversity Senior Officer from UNDP, and Georgina Catacora Vargas, Researcher at the Academic Peasant Unit, Tiahuanacu, of the Bolivian Catholic University. Thank you so much to all of you for being here with us. And now I will like to give the floor to Cicilia Githaiga, Advisor of the Women's Caucus, who is joining this roundtable all the way from Kenya. Thank you so much, Cicilia, for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amelia. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. You want me to start with my comments or introduce myself and everyone introduces themselves and then we proceed?
It's just gonna be used, but you can introduce yourself and give in your comments, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Cicilia Githaiga. I practice law within Kenya as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. So my main focus is usually human rights, environment, and other rights concerning indigenous peoples and local communities. And I am also a practitioner in the policy space. Amongst other things which I do, so for today, I want to address us and also hear the great interventions of the great panelists who are gathered here today, and also the participants, I'm sure, who have different experience from different countries. So on my part, I would like to speak about my own experience with Kenya previously, because I think at the moment, maybe we are still new in the year, we have not begun in earnest, but from my own reflection of what has happened before, the GBF, adoption of the GBF and adoption of the Gender Plan of Action were very good things for us, because then the topic of how we get involved as women and girls is now on the table on a big scale. So it means that we have to not only demand our rights as we used to, but now this has become a norm from the international to domestication at the national and the local levels. So what that means is that even when NBSAPs, as you have had policy instruments for implementation of the CBD, which also do contain a lot of information about a country, would have to adopt an approach which addresses all levels of governance, from the community to the subnational level, and the national and the regional and the international level. So it's a graduated approach, looking at it from the top down or bottom up, depending on which area you practice. You will find that the principles could be the same, with variations related to the space where these women and girls are found. For example, the ones working at the international levels might have different dynamics from the ones at the regional and the community level. That's what I mean. So we have these levels of governance in Kenya. Besides the international, we have the national, the subnational, and then we have the local. So what do we expect to happen with respect to implementation of the GBF is to notice that this is a policy-making process, which means it is subject to the laws of Kenya as far as public participation is concerned. And public participation in Kenya requires that you involve all sections of society across levels of government. So that will mean you involve the youth, IPLCs, women, private sector, who else is there? Civil society, and everybody. And the participation not only needs to take place, it has to be meaningful. So what that means is that even for women and girls, that participation has to be meaningful. But for it to be meaningful, the procedure adopted has to be sound. It has to be good procedure that is legally acceptable. And in addition, the procedure needs to be one that is accepted. You know, we don't create rules as we go. We must follow the rules that have been laid down. It's only that when they are not very clear, then proper guidance is adopted. Because once the rules and the procedures are good, then it means that the substance of the rights that you are seeking will be realized. I hope I am making sense. Good rules and good procedures make a sound process that will lead to achievement of the rights that we seek to pursue. So what that means is that women must, in addition to seeking rights to be implemented, they have to ensure that they are engaged in the processes of decision making, just like the GBF had mentioned in the two targets that we are always happy about, 22 and 23. So we have to ensure that if there is information out there, we are able to access the information. And if there is a process of decision making, we have to be able to find a way of participating in the decision making process. And we have heard before that if a table is not provided, you have to make your own table. So we also have to have avenues through which we can engage with government, as we know that government is a key stakeholder in the development of NBSAP. That means, therefore, that we cannot purport to implement our actions without involvement of government. And it's a good partnership that will yield in the long term. So we have to find out also where government is working and on what. And because government works across sectors, across industries, across levels of governance, etc., it therefore means women have to have a procedure for engagement, like an engagement strategy with their governments, so that they can be able to get the information when it is available, be able to participate in decision making, like a review of laws or policies when the opportunities arise, and to also be able to finally be part of the sharing of the benefits that arise from use and utilization of natural resources. For example, so there are many ways of implementing our rights, but again, there has to be some order because we have to pay attention to what the international mechanism talks about, like the targets 22 and 23, which provided for access to information, to biodiversity information for IPLCs, women and girls. And then we also need to put in mind that whatever we develop has to be in line with our target 23 about the gender responsive approaches, which ensures that women and girls are able to contribute to the 3 objectives of biodiversity of the CBD convention, sorry. So those 3 targets, if for those ones who might not have interacted a lot with the CBD, require that we ensure that there is sustainable development, and then that we ensure that there's fair and equitable sharing of benefits, and that there is conservation. And if you look closely at our history, we have found that based on even the practical example of Nobel laureate Wangari Maathai from Kenya, women have managed to participate in conservation and achieve great things. And we have also been able to be part of movements from the ancient times based on the feminist theory in environmental jurisprudence, legal thinking, to put it that way. So we have a role to play, and it's a big role, especially because women make up at least 50% of the global population. There could be variations, but it's a huge number, which means a huge impact. So how to do that? When developing the NBSAP, it is always a good idea to make sure that where the sectors are represented, the number of women compared to men is also taken into account. For example, our Kenyan situation requires that we maintain a 2/3 gender rule, meaning that there is not one gender that must exceed the other one in any spheres of public engagement, policy making, or offices everywhere. So having that in mind, and some countries have 50%, which is very good. So having that in mind, it is important to consider the proportion of women in the sectors that are being represented in the development of the NBSAP, and this would be practically almost all the sectors of the economy. So how many of them come to the table to discuss matters, gender, or how they participate, even if they are in different levels, academia, students for the younger women, and maybe the technical expertise, managers. There are those areas in society which we need to consider when addressing women's issues, so that we don't have a threshold for women holding smaller positions and men holding higher positions in a certain skewed format, whether by design or by default. It's good to make sure that the ones who participate are equal, both women and girls. And to do this, it's good to identify in those NBSAPs the vulnerable women also, and to identify how many of them are beneficiaries of these processes, how many or which parts of society provide women as stakeholders. They are also change makers, and then we can be able to define their level of engagement in the various processes of development of the NBSAP. And I believe that when we go to what is equality, it would be good to also check the specific issues with respect to the vulnerable people, especially persons with disability, the marginalized, the minority communities, because then we have to apply a different standard to make sure that the women and girls in those communities are given better a bigger platform or enhancement of opportunities for them to participate in engagement in the NBSAP. I do not want to take a lot of time for the sake of others. Amelia, if you have more time, I could engage later. Thank you for that for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for giving us all of these inputs. Like, definitely all of these are important for our discussions. They're about the challenges, the opportunities, and the particular cases that we need to look, the particular details of each cases that we need to take a look at. And now, once considering that one of the eminent responsibilities of all governments is to revise and update the NBSAPs aligned with the Kunming Montreal GBF, we will listen from Jilian Campell, Head of Monitoring, Review and Reporting at UN Convention on Biological Diversity, on how could this be done in a gender-responsive manner. Welcome, Jilian. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, and it's great to be here with you. I am going to share some slides, and also I'm going to warn people now that I kind of decided to present maybe on a little broader topic. So, okay, can you see my slides? Just confirm and I'll make it. Is that working?
Yes, we are looking at the PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to take a little bit of a step back and first talk about the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was just adopted, and then talk about the review mechanism for the GBF, which does include the national reports. I know that we're going to talk about later. It includes the NBSAPs, it includes global review, and it includes it's how we sort of work together to make sure that we're getting commitments towards the Global Biodiversity Framework. So when you look at the Global Biodiversity Framework that was just adopted, this is the package that was adopted. I think that there is a lot of focus, obviously, on—
I'm so sorry, Jilian, for interrupting, but people are saying that they can't see your PowerPoint.
Oh, no.
I don't know why anyone else can see it.
Oh, it says that it can only be seen by the host and the co-host because I don't have permission. So I do wonder if it's possible that I should stop and that you should share, because it does. I see now that I got a message that says I can only share with the host.
So Mina, could you make her co-host, please?
Sorry about that. I apologize. I can stop sharing and maybe try again.
Yes, please. I'm sorry for this.
Yeah, I'm also sorry. Okay, can people see it now?
Yes, they can see now.
Okay, anyway, again, I apologize. So, sorry. So this is the package that was adopted in terms of what the Global Biodiversity Framework is. As you see, there's two sections that relate to the global goals and the targets, which are, of course, getting a lot of attention. However, there was a whole package that was adopted that includes a theory of change. It includes considerations for implementation. It includes communication. It includes this whole package. And what the considerations for implementation are, I think this is very important to this meeting, because in those considerations for implementation, this outlines how the entire GBF should be implemented. So it's not focused on Target 23, which of course does specifically have to do with involving men, women, and any people of any gender identity. This sets the stage for how all of the work should be done. And so I wanted to highlight, obviously, it has a focus on IPLCs, different value systems, national circumstances, but there's a few things that I think really do overlap, which are, a whole of government, whole of society approach cannot be done without women. Collective effort has to involve women's groups and has to involve a broad, a range of stakeholders. The human rights-based approach and intergenerational equity are all, of course, key to how women are going to be engaged in this framework. And then gender is also highlighted as one of the considerations for implementation. And so the idea of the GBF is that the whole process, as I said, really needs to be this whole of government, whole of society approach where we all work together. In addition to that, I will talk briefly about the mechanism for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review, which is where specific guidance on the NBSAP development and on the national reporting appears. So in this review mechanism, so in the decision that I just mentioned, 15.6, it says that NBSAPs and national targets will be aligned with the GBF by COP16 and submitted. National reports will be submitted in early 2026 and then again in 2029. And this will include the indicators that were adopted in the monitoring framework. A global analysis of the NBSAPs will be quickly done at COP16, mostly to say who has done one and what targets they've submitted to because of the timing. But then there will be a global review of progress, something like what the GBO has been, a new evolution of that at COP17. There will also be an SBI open-ended forum, which is piloted, BPRs, and non-state actor commitments towards the GBF, which are all detailed in what the COP decided. And gender cuts across all elements of this. So it's not possible really to do any of these without engaging women's groups and women. Obviously, as I just mentioned, if we really are going to say that this is a whole of government, whole of society approach, then we're going to have to involve people in all the different elements. And specifically in this decision, the gender plan, the implementation of the gender plan of action is also highlighted as something that parties are encouraged to do. So what do you need to do in order to update your NBSAP now that this is the challenge that countries have? So first, there's a need to understand what the new global biodiversity framework includes. And that's not so straightforward, actually, because the targets, some of them are quite complicated, and the amount of detail in the targets themselves could be interpreted in different ways. So every country is going to need to interpret it, what this means for them, how they can nationally implement this, who are the stakeholders that are involved, and then make some revisions. Additionally, countries committed to identifying how non-state actor commitments can feed in the context of the NBSAPs. This is actually in the template that was adopted in this same decision. And as I mentioned, there was this commitment also to a whole of society approach and the encouragement to implement the gender plan of action. So now I'm just going to sort of freely discuss that if we look at what was done in the past, and reflect on the last decade under ACI, many countries didn't really succeed in having this whole of society, whole of government approach. The political will often wasn't high enough. And so I think we're now in a situation where we want to move forward. We want to learn from what was done in the past, take the best practices of the past, and also build a better implementation of the GBF. And how do we work together to ensure that women's groups are better involved? How do we promote this ownership from people outside of the Ministry of Environment and the traditional CBD stakeholders? How do we use discussions like the one today to get more people involved, to get more awareness of the need for us to all work together on biodiversity issues and working towards this common vision of living in harmony with nature? I think we're not quite there yet. And so it's great to have discussions like this where we can find a way to work together better at the global level, at the national level, learn from good experiences in some countries. We just heard from Kenya, learn from what's gone well and try to replicate this so that everyone is moving forward together. Because in the end, there's no way that we're going to be able to achieve this global biodiversity framework, or there's no way we're going to be able to achieve the vision, which is living in harmony with nature, which is really important for all of us, if we don't all work together. And so I'll just leave it at that. And then if there is a discussion that we're going to have, then that would be wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jilian, for sharing with all of us your knowledge and setting up the bigger picture. Definitely, we need to also consider that this discussion is part of a bigger one. And as you say, we are trying to contribute to achieve this vision, and we are not going to do if half of the population and their priorities, their contributions, their concerns are not being also addressed. And now it's turned to Marion Marigo, to whom we are really grateful for being here despite being ill. And Marion, she recorded herself, but she's still here to address Q&A. But since she's a bit ill, I'm gonna share her intervention, and where she's gonna share with us concrete measures for a reporting that contributes to gender justice and women's empowerment. So without adding more, just allow me to share the video and confirm that you can see it, please. Yes, and I'm gonna play and just a couple of seconds for you to confirm that you can listen to it.
Hello everyone, my name is Marion. I'm a capacity building and biodiversity officer at UNDP. As you can,
People can hear the video. If you could confirm.
It's kind of, the sound quality is not great.
Okay, I have all the volume up. Let me try again.
hello everyone, my name is Marion. I'm a capacity building and biodiversity officer at UNDP. As you can hear with my voice, I am finding myself pretty sick right now, but I really wanted to give this presentation on how to develop gender responsive national reports. So I took the freedom to pre-record this presentation yesterday, so we're not interrupted by me coughing, and I'll be there for the Q&A today.
Okay, yes, Marion is going to share directly so we can hear better. Please, Sumina, if you can make Marion the host. Thank you. And I will also send the video link.
Okay, let's see. Let me know if that works better. Hello, everyone. My name is Marion Marigo. I'm a capacity building and biodiversity senior officer at UNDP. As you can hear with my voice, I am finding myself pretty sick right now, but I really wanted to give this presentation on how to develop gender responsive national reports. So I took the freedom to pre-record this presentation yesterday, so we're not interrupted by me coughing, and I'll be there for the Q&A today. Let's get started. Our work at UNDP aims to support GEF-eligible countries to implement projects in link with the CBD directives and timeline. So we provide support through, the NBSAP project, the National Report project, and currently we are working and implementing the Global Framework project that focuses on the readiness and make sure that countries can assess the gaps in their national targets vis-a-vis the new framework that was just adopted a few months ago in Montreal. These projects all have a gender action plan with gender-sensitive indicators. This gender action plan is not necessarily a core part of the project document, it's an annex, but it still signifies the importance of gender in this project. Our team is supporting between 60 and 70 countries in each of these projects. So we have a lot of different national contexts to deal with, and different national contexts mean that there is a different understanding of gender. A lot of countries don't have the same understanding of what gender means. There are different levels of understanding among the national stakeholders, not just among the countries, but within the countries themselves. And a lot of countries are still unclear why it is relevant to mainstream gender in the designing phase, the monitoring phase, and implementation of NBSAPs, and why is it important and how can we report on gender? Overall, I guess the main question that countries still have is how to mainstream gender and how to make sure that we can have a gender responsive national report. So our job is to support countries recognizing the multitude of understanding and context. We always try to start by sharing guidance and technical knowledge with the supported countries on what gender is, and really break down a little bit the jargon. Gender responsiveness and gender sensitive is very much technical terms, and we try to through technical guidance and webinars and one-on-one support, we try to make clear and explain to the countries what that means. From 2018 through 2020, mid-2020, we worked on supporting GEF-eligible parties to submit a high-quality, data-driven, gender-responsive 6 national report to the CBD. That's what we call the 6NR. A national report aims to assess the progress of the NBSAP implementation. So it can be helping a country to evaluate the remaining gaps, but it can also serve as a document, as a central document that can lead the implementation of the NBSAP moving forward once the gaps have been assessed. It's an occasion, this project was an occasion to explain what gender responsiveness is and why it was important, not only per the requirement of the CBD, the GEF, and implementing agencies, but also because it truly helps countries in achieving their national targets on biodiversity. Gender responsive approach is a proactive approach that identifies, understands, and implements intervention to address gender gaps and overcome gender bias. At UNDP, we wanted to make sure that a maximum of countries were producing and understanding what the gender responsive 6NR is. So to do so, we provided technical support via technical guidance, as I was mentioning, on gender and stakeholder engagement more generally. We encourage peer exchange because it happened that a lot of countries that are facing similar challenges or have similar cultures or even similar ecosystem are really powerful when it comes to interacting with each other and learn from each other. And of course, we provided one-on-one support to better understand, again, the national context and the capacity of each country, because the capacity within each team drastically varies also. Some teams have national gender experts, some others do not. Importantly, the feedback that we received from the countries enabled us to provide feedback in turn to the GEF for upcoming project and refine our ability to support countries better moving forward. So as I said, we provided support to the GEF eligible parties during the 6NR project. In this project, we had 64 countries. Based on the gender analysis that we did of all of the final 6NR from UNDP supported countries, we established that 56% of them were gender responsive. We did this analysis based on the final document, the final 6NR that was submitted to CBD, which included a quantitative and qualitative review of all the 6NRs. We also took into account the quarterly survey that were answered quarterly by the countries, where they had a chance to describe in detail their understanding of gender responsiveness, tell us more detail about the capacities allocated for that purpose, and tell us which stakeholders, and especially women's group and indigenous people, they were mobilizing. The main issue we found out through the analysis of 6NRs and the surveys is that the inability to collect and use sex or gender disaggregated data was really prominent. It was not possible for most countries to assess the contribution of both men and women in the implementation of their NBSAP, and therefore it was impossible to capture the respective contributions of both women and men to national biodiversity targets. This is due to the lack of gender-sensitive indicators in NBSAPs themselves. In very few cases, the countries had adopted indicators that would capture the central role played by women in biodiversity conservation and management. But really, for most of the countries, this was not possible. And the acknowledgement and mainstreaming of gender in the national report was done through qualitative case studies to showcase that women and women's group and indigenous women had a central role to play in the country, and a key knowledge that could be very useful to implement a national strategy. This point of missing indicators in NBSAP has to really be taken into account in the next NBSAP design phase. And we all know this is coming. We know that there is a strong movement now to have national biodiversity targets updated, as well as NBSAP as a whole. I, nonetheless, would like to take a step back and look at the picture, and considering it was the first time that CBD required to have a gender-responsive national report, this number, 56%, can be really seen as positive because it shows that there is a political understanding of the importance of gender and women mobilization and empowerment, despite the fact that there is very few data that can be used to support the writing of a national report. Most of the countries that we worked with also reported that there was a willingness from authorities in the countries to focus on gender and an appreciation for the technical support that was provided. So all in all, there was positive signals that, it was the first time we were doing a gender responsive report, but that it could be done better in the future. One point that seems to be key for continuing the mainstreaming of gender and ensure gender-sensitive NBSAP and gender-responsive 6NR or 7NR is the mobilization of the right stakeholders. In the current project, the Early Action Support Project, it is required from countries to mobilize women's group and ensure their active participation throughout the process. So building on a steering committee that potentially could include women's group, that can be really helpful on the long term, which is what's needed, to implement not only this Early Action Support Project, but also more generally the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And last, I can say that countries also noted that more support and capacity were needed, including through capacity building activities, both at the national and the global level. National teams are experiencing often a lack of gender expert that would have the capacity, knowledge, time, and financial resources, have the capacity to train all the staff on a project, mobilize the right key stakeholders, and ensure decent consultation modalities, and eventually collect and promote successful case studies and collect the right data. Very briefly, because I think my time is up soon, our team is currently finalizing a publication titled Gender Equality, Women's Empowerment, and Leadership in National Biodiversity Planning and Reporting. This publication builds on the gender analysis that I mentioned that we did for the 6NR, and it focuses in detail on the capacity, gaps, and challenges encountered by the countries, especially the ministries of environment and the lack of capacity and data that they experience. The publication also offers entry points for countries to mainstream gender more systematically and efficiently, especially in their national biodiversity plans, which will be necessary for the next step within CBD. Our team is currently finalizing that publication. We're going through the quality assessment process, and I'm hoping to be able to share this with you very shortly. In terms of the next steps, countries have a lot to do, but that can be seen as a lot of opportunities to focus on gender. So as I said, we're currently supporting the Early Action Support Project to focus on aligning national biodiversity targets on the GBF. Based on the CBD recommendations, we obviously encourage the whole of society approach, which includes women's groups, IPLCs, and other relevant stakeholders. Countries will likely have to, replicate national targets that are linked to gender. Since now we have at least 2 targets at a global level that are linked to gender. So there is really hope for that to be translated into national targets. And countries are encouraged to build steering committees, as I was saying, that would be in place not only for the EAS project, but also for the other upcoming project, and having a strong participation of women in the steering committee would be extremely relevant and powerful. So this EAS project is the basis for whatever comes next. Parties are encouraged to submit their NBSAP by COP16, which is at the end of 2024, which is around the corner, really. After that, there will be a new cycle starting to assess the efficiency of implementation of NBSAPs. And so the story repeats, right? And we will support countries in preparing their 7th national report, which I am pretty sure we have a strong gender component, and hopefully we'll build on gender sensitive indicators in the NBSAP, which would enable us to have more than 56% of gender responsive national report. That's it for me. Thank you so much for listening. Again, you can reach out to me on the address on this screen, and I'll be there for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marion, first of all, for being here while being sick and for making the effort of recording you. I think that all of us, we have really learned a lot during your intervention, and I will take one of the phrases that you said, that is, but I disagree a bit, because you said that the story is repeating or is starting again, and I think that the opportunity is there again to make the things different, as you said, because there are a lot of best practices and lessons learned, right? So I think you highlight many of the gaps and challenges that have to be addressed, that there's no other way if, as Jilian said, we want to achieve the 2050 vision. And there's no way of reporting gender responsibly if there is no gender responsive planning, right? But before jumping into the discussion, because I guess that all of us will have comments to the 3 previous speakers' interventions, let us hear from Georgina Catacora Vargas, researcher at the Bolivian Catholic University, about national and on-ground experiences of how to develop both instruments. So please, Georgina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and greetings to everyone from Bolivia. In this intervention, I'm going to try to be fast, but I would like to address few general points on the topic that joining us today, and also a few reflections based on the Bolivian experience. And I would like to start saying that the implementation of the good elements of the Common Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in relation to gender, specifically in relation to women and girls, is very likely, which way I would like to say is very positive, but it's also very likely to find important limitations, challenges, and even obstacles if there is not in place, nationally in place, sufficient regulatory and policy instruments that acknowledge the role of women in biodiversity action and secures the protection and realization of women's rights at social, economical, and political level. With this starting point, what I am trying to convey is that NBSAPs and national reports are part of a regulatory and policy context and cannot be isolated from them, from this context. If national regulations and policies nationally are not gender responsive, it's going to be very challenging than NBSAPs and national reports are. And this is very much directly linked with a key consideration that also Jilian mentioned for the GBF implementation, which is mentioned in paragraph 15 of the GBF text, which says, quote, successful implementation of the framework will depend on 1, ensuring gender equity, 2, empower women and girls, and 3, reducing inequities, end of the quote. Well, it was not as such, but this is what more or less the text of paragraph 15. And this text refers to 3 key conditions that results from a series of different normative and policy measures that aim at 1, fostering the same opportunities to women in relation to other genders, 2, improving and securing the exercise of women's and girls' agency, meaning that they have the knowledge, other capacities and conditions to decide, manage, and fairly decide their own livelihoods in dignifying ways. And the third point that this refers is reducing radically, meaning to the point of eliminating them, the imbalanced, discriminatory, and unfair distribution of material and immaterial conditions needed to secure well-being, in this case to women and girls. Now, these considerations of paragraph 15, which is a consideration, and I would like to refer them as condition, cannot be fostered and achieved individually. They are part and they are a result of social construction, of collaborative processes, and it's because of that it requires collective action and where national regulations and policies play an important role. And with this, I would like to come back to one of my earlier points, which is that the existence of appropriate regulatory and policy instruments that acknowledge, in other words, that visibilize, that stop invisibility on women's roles in biodiversity and secure the protection and realization of women's social, economic, cultural, and political rights are relevant to update national NBSAPs and national reports gender responsibly, guided but not limited to the GBF elements. And now here comes a very important question, how to move towards this formulation or strengthening, depending on the national situation, of these regulatory and policy instruments that are gender responsive. Well, it depends on each country's context, and here I would like to share two specific situations from Bolivia. The first one is that in the process of developing the NBSAPs, in which I participated in specific activities, it was very clear that the majority of the instruments and national policies did not make any differentiation in their provisions and implementations in relation to the condition, roles, and relevance on biodiversity related to women. Therefore, there were many normative gaps from a gender perspective that impede advancing towards an equitable women's participation in conservation, in sustainable use of biodiversity, and in fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization. So acknowledging that in the Bolivian 2020-2030 NBSAP, it was included a cross-cutting line of action, which is development of norms, mechanisms, and instruments that secure women's participation in sustainable and integral biodiversity management. This is the text of the normative, the regulatory framework of Bolivia. So from this cross-cutting line of action, two other prioritized actions were defined, which go to the very basics, which these two are first to formulate criteria to guarantee and evaluate the inclusion and participation of women in sustainable and integral biodiversity management, and two, to identify normative gaps to adjust the laws, programs, projects, actions to secure equitable women's participation. And now, the very first one in relation to develop criteria to guarantee and evaluate inclusion and participation of women also includes two other very basic aspects. One is to developing a theoretical and methodological framework, meaning reflecting on what is happening and what we are doing to assess the current participation of women in policies and regulatory frameworks and territorial rights. And second, to also assess women's roles, knowledge, and conditions to move towards a sustainable and integral biodiversity management. Now, this is in relation to an example of NBSAPs. In relation to the 6th national report, the process in which I participated in the planning, some data gathering, and revision of specific sections, in the process, it was very clear that we don't have sex segregated statistics that can help us to identify women's circumstances, roles, effects from policies, implementations, and others that are very relevant in biodiversity, and basically that data does not exist. And this is not only a problem in Bolivia or countries in the region, but I would dare to say is a really systemic limitation that we have. But this doesn't happen only in national statistics. I would like to say that this lack of statistics that perpetuates women's invisibility also happens in academic research. And I can mention this because last year with colleagues, we did a study that entitled Women's Sustainable Ecosystem Management and Adaptation to Climate Change in the Andean Region. We concentrated in the Andean region, a policy-oriented literature review. And we found that only 10% of the articles retrieved at the end, there were only 90 articles related to women's ecosystem management in the Andean region. And the majority did not make a clear indication of women's role and the ways how they organize to manage ecosystems. However, our findings show that women have very important roles in managing biodiversity at multiple scales, not only at household level, but also at ecosystem level. And this is very important. And well, this report is available online, both versions, English and Spanish, if someone is interested. But considering the science policy interface, I brought this example because it's very important also to call for a gender responsive approach in research that can contribute to visualize women's roles and support policies to visualize them and take them in a differentiated manner in national regulations and policies. So in conclusion, being said that, I would like to say that the GBF includes very important elements to contribute to consider and acknowledge women's roles in biodiversity, women's role in biodiversity action, and some of their rights to achieve the objectives of the CBD. And that makes the GBF a very important instrument to leverage gender responsive approach. Yet, if it is not accompanied by national regulations and policies, the implementation of the GBF, gender responsive NBSAPs and national reports will be very, very limited. And so, once again, an underlying condition to update NBSAPs and produce national reports that are gender responsible, it requires a deep review and adjustment of the relevant regulatory frameworks and policies. This is not an easy task, but it's possible if there is political will. And it is highly relevant because we know that strengthening women's role in biodiversity action is crucial for halting biodiversity loss and for its conservation and sustainable use based on a gender perspective that is inclusive and based on justice principles. That's all from my side. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Georgina, also for sharing these challenges, opportunities from the national level, and also for giving us, this big image, because as you say, we are not, and as other speakers have mentioned it's not, women's situations, conditions are not in the environmental and biodiversity context are not isolated. It's the reflection of a complex reality, but also that there are many ways forward. And that's why I guess all of us, we are conveyed here from the different backgrounds, because we have an understanding and a commitment to change this reality. So I would like to mention also that for our participants and our interpreters, that we know that we are over time, but we would like to invite you all to stay at least 10 more minutes. My colleagues will be in contact with you to address the question and answers, because we have a couple of them, and afterwards we are going to conclude. And one of the questions that we have is, just let me read it. Will the monitoring framework include an overarching principle on data disaggregation, including by sex and gender, to address gender gaps in reporting towards relevant targets? This is mostly for Jilian.
Yes, so the monitoring framework was adopted. The disaggregations were not adopted along with the monitoring framework, so to speak. But if you look at the terms of reference for this this ad hoc technical expert group on the indicators that was established, disaggregation is part of the mandate of that group. And so that would be exactly the intention would be to have a paper that goes to COP 16 that elaborates on disaggregations. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jilian. And we have another one from Marion, sorry. They ask, how could a women's group could be engaged in this early action support program?
Yes, hi everyone. Yes, so the group that are engaged in this project vary from country to country. So we, as the entity supporting the countries, we encourage them to select or identify the groups of women or more generally, relevant stakeholders that should be involved in what we call a steering committee. Because as I was saying in the presentation, we have, I think, 69 countries this time. We can't really provide one specific guidance that would apply to all of the countries. So that's why we provide quite a lot of flexibility in the groups that should be involved. However, we definitely insist on the fact that it's important to have a steering committee, not just for the early action support project, which is the one that we're implementing right now, but it's also a steering committee that will be reused, I think, for the NBSAP project, because, right now we're focusing on the readiness and updating national biodiversity targets. Then we'll go on to updating the whole NBSAP and implementing it. And then we'll go on to doing a 7 national report. So it makes a lot of sense that the steering committee that is involved in this project is actually on the long term. So our recommendation is to have a women's group involved. There is a small gender plan of action also in this EAS project that has, let's say, reasonable, achievable indicators. And one of them is to have at least 5 groups of women involved. But we rely on the country and the country office at UNDP to identify those group of women, because the countries know better than the global team at this level.
Thank you so much, Marion. And I also think that it could be interesting if the Women Caucus could also partner, because most of our members are distributed all around the globe. So, and they, as you can see in the chat, they are showing a lot of interest in to participate actively in all of these processes. And we have another question, if our dear interpreters can support me, because I don't speak French. If you can translate the Patrice Sadbo question. And while they do, I'm just going to address that we have these other questions for requesting our speakers, if it's possible to share the PPTs and also the links to the reports and publications that you have mentioned. I have seen that you have done in the chat. Thank you so much. And now we have this question also from Patrice. If the country has no regulatory or policy instruments, will its NBSAPs be rejected? What will it take to encourage this country? Perhaps, Jilian, you could answer this one. Or maybe Georgina, the question about if the country has no regulatory or policy instruments, will its NBSAPs be rejected? What will it take to encourage this country?
Thank you. Not sure if I am the right person to answer this, but I would give my perspective, and which is a country that is party to the CBD is because it has certain level of commitment towards biodiversity. So it has to have at least a minimum number of regulatory and policy instruments to put in place. So I think at this stage, there is no country that has zero on that, or would have even also zero in relation to policies that relate to gender responsiveness. So I think there is always something to grasp on and to keep building the processes. But if it is a party to the CBD, the NBSAPs and all the institutional support existing to develop them is an advance. So that will help to, if a country does not have, to have it and to improve it. So I don't think it's a question of approving or disapproving NBSAP, because at the end also are national instruments, and that's also under development, and it's also part of the, in relation to the national frameworks, is part of the country's sovereignty. So I think it's, in my view, it's going to be very, very hard to find that situation that there is nothing or an NBSAP rejected. That would happen at national level. The CBD and mechanisms does not reject an NBSAP, so that's not possible. But perhaps Jilian or someone else from the CBD or UNDP have more precise answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgina. Marion, would you like to come on board?
Yeah, I think Georgina's comment is very on point. I see Jilian is coming back on board. The CBD doesn't have the mandate to refuse an NBSAP, so it wouldn't be refused at this stage, but it's also, it would be surprising that there is no regulatory mechanism. And again, the CBD has a lot of parties, signatories, and so there is not one way to have regulatory mechanism. It also depends on the country. So I don't have much to add to what Georgina says. I think it was very on point. I do think Jilian is coming back. I think, Patrice, you also have the question on the chat about not giving realistic data. And again, I think I'm not sure from what perspective this is coming from, and the fact that countries have to give wrong data. I think this is really not what we want. At least at UNDP, we really want to know the reality of the country, you know, and if the targets, whether they are national or global, are not achieved, then we need to know that they're not achieved. And that's what was in the Global Biodiversity Outlook number 5, where we looked at the implementation of all of the Aichi, activities to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets. And the result for most of us was somewhat disappointed, because we realized that we didn't achieve the targets. But from that recognition, we can also understand what was missing from the previous framework and being able to do better on this framework and address. And one of the, I think, key things that all of the speakers have talked about is the lack of relevant indicators. In our case, we're talking about gender sensitive indicators, but there can be other indicators, and on I don't know, ecosystem conservation, for instance, that can be used. So I'm really hoping that people do not think that we need to submit wrong data because that's not helping anyone.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Marion. And Cecilia, I can see your hand. If you could be a bit brief, please.
A reaction to that, just to jump in and add, in addition to what has been said, I would add that this is why civil society is in society, to check and confirm and report, so that when we have information, not that we're doing, such work with a bad intention, but also to show that there are things that need to be done, because in the absence of civil society, a certain check is missing, and society might not be able to, for example, report on gender appropriately. For example, the civil society can check to know from, for example, the policies that have been developed, how many of them have had in the programs women involved, and then how many of them have had women at the grassroots level involved. So these are things that civil society at different levels, at community level, at national level, subnational, wherever they are, even at the international, can help us understand so that we can speak about it and get people to comply, because it's in our interest, all of us. Thank you. Oh, sorry, one more thing, Amelia, sorry. Kenya has this body called the National Gender and Equality Commission. This Gender and Equality Commission is a body where you're supposed to say, report issues of inequality or discrimination or things like that. So it would be a good place for us, for example, to say and report that there was no compliance with this particular aspect. And then other mechanisms that are legal can follow to enforce compliance, because we are part of the CBD and it would be a requirement for Kenya to comply with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cicilia. And before closing the session, I would just like to mention that there are a couple of more questions that we're going to address by email, because we know that we are on over time, and but we for sure gonna pay attention to them. And well, definitely this has been such an inspiring session. We got a lot done today. Thank you all for your contributions and for making this a vivid dialogue. And despite the challenges, thank you so much for your patience. After today, it is clear how gender considerations could be completely mainstream into NBSAPs and national reports, and that we have also, as you mentioned, lessons learned, different mechanisms, best practices, and the support of these institutions, and particularly these two colleagues that are gender champions and they are really committed. I mean, Marion and Jilian, because you are representing your institutions, but also we have these experiences from the national governments that and the on-ground situations and the women's groups that showing us that it's doable and that there are many challenges, but it is doable. And thank you so much, Georgina and Cicilia, for sharing your cases. For all of you, dear participants, my colleagues have shared many messages in the chat, inviting you to join the Women's Caucus, to follow Women for Biodiversity social media, and remember to keep an eye out, because this is a series of events that are going to happen during the year, trying to unfold the COP15 decisions from a gender perspective. I wish you a great weekend and stay safe until next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.